So it's Thursday today, and it's always a shock to me that there's, it's only one full day left. It's a little early to say it yet because chaos could reign tomorrow, but I do appreciate everybody sitting. It feels really strong and great commitment, so good. It's by the by really, but when I was sitting I was thinking of, I was reading somewhere about, remember the story of Solomon and the baby and the two mothers? And the two mothers, you'll know it, but I'll just say it to set the so two mothers are arguing over whose baby this baby is. I don't know the backdrop to the story, I don't know how the confusion arose, but it's a parable I guess, so we don't have to go too deeply into it. And Solomon listens to them both and says that given that they can't agree, that the solution is that he'll chop the baby down the middle and give a half to each. So I don't know what this is in the story, but I have a vision in my head of him holding the baby up and calling the swordsman over, and he's going to chop the baby in the middle, down the middle. And one of the women shouts, "Stop, stop! Give it to the other mother." And of course, being Solomon and being a parable, he actually gave it to the woman who asked him to give it away. And what's that story got to do with Zen practice, do you think? Does it make any... This has nothing to do with that, it just came to my mind.
Letting go?
Letting go, yeah.
Wisdom and compassion.
Pardon?
Wisdom and compassion.
Wisdom and compassion, yeah.
How to save the cat.
How to save the cat. Yeah, that could have been a good one.
Also only letting go in the very last minute.
At the very last minute, yeah.
Nothing else.
And I think that's the point I was thinking of, because we can change our view at the last minute. And we can make a change. It's not like we're locked into how we are or where we are. So we can make a decision to be more spacious, less attached, more generous. Just like that, It doesn't need a lot of preparation. It just needs a circumstance. I don't know if that's anything to do with the old argument of instant or gradual enlightenment. Maybe you can think on it. Anyway, I just wanted to start carry on in a way where I left off with some paradoxes, but I also wanted to talk about the dilemma of the small self and its relief. The dilemma of the small self. And one of my dilemmas, which creates ambivalence in the Sangha, I realise today ambivalence about silence and all those kind of things, is that I have an ambivalence between having a sense of humour and bringing some joy into the practice, and also realising that that we also need self-imposed discipline. We need silence, and we all wear dark clothes, and we sit in lines, and so we also bring this sense of order. I know for some folk it can feel a bit miserable, really, and I think part of my ambivalence is to do, I've spoken about it before, but the first 5 years of practice that I did, I used to travel a long way down south from Liverpool on my own. I didn't know anyone else. I didn't know anybody in the Sangha, and I didn't know anybody else from Liverpool, and I didn't really know much about Zen. And I'd turn up, and it was completely silent. Completely silent. And not only was it completely silent, but we also, as is sometimes requested, we didn't even look at each other. We walked around with our eyes downcast, So even if you passed one another on the country lane, we wouldn't say hello or acknowledge each other. And my experience of that was a lot of feeling an awful lot of loneliness. I didn't, I couldn't understand why I felt so miserable. At the same time, I was drawn to it. I couldn't I couldn't not go. I would on the way driving down, I was thinking, why am I doing this? And I'd kind of pull in as a lay-by and think, should I go home? And I never did, but I always wanted to, and so anyway, I'm just kind of explaining to you the backdrop to my kind of ambivalence around the whole question of how we organise Sesshin. And some of it suits some folk, and some of it doesn't suit others, and there's also a danger of falling between two stools. But we've managed. We're 10 years in. There's lots of folk here, so I think we are managing a workable compromise, if you like, that reflects my own ambivalence. I don't know whether that'll help or whether it'll cause more disagreement, but it brings me back to this, to at that time, and thinking about it, and it's, perhaps it's not that different now, but I was really in the grip of this ego small self. I was delusion and small self with gold trimmings, for sure. I'm an expert. I think we're all experts in small self and its constant demands and its need for a point. That was my big thing. Its need for purpose, its need for function, its need for affirmation. And from this perspective now, I realise that breaking the grip of that, despite the story of the two mothers, is that it's an ongoing and daily task. And then I ask myself, and maybe you ask yourself, why would you bother? Why bother with this? Why bother with this hard practice? And it is a hard practice. And I think pragmatically I can say that for sure it's worthwhile, because otherwise, for myself, and maybe it's different for you, but certainly for myself, I always experienced a sense of lack, a sense of something missing, that I wasn't kind of complete. There was always something missing. And does that resonate with folk? I mean, do you feel? Yeah, that's kind of the way it is, that we feel there's something missing. I really had a bad case of this. I went around for years and years wondering, why is it that I feel there's something missing? And I could never sort it out. And then that brings up the question of why does that arise? Why do we feel there's something missing? And I suppose bottom line, it's exactly what the Buddha realised, that the real problem is impermanence and eternal change. And eternal change, expressed by impermanence, feels threatening and unsettling. And within that, I found myself, and maybe you do, constantly trying to find a place where I could stand, that I could stand and felt solid and secure, where I could feel, that this was a place I could kick off from. And I never succeeded. And what I realised is, and still realise, because I'm still subject to it to a lesser degree, thankfully, but still subject to it, that this sense of self, it's always created itself in the past. Lost, joys, wrong decisions, successes, failures, all those things. And then again in the future, hopes, fears, anxiety, possibility of loss of control, all those things are never actually present, so life's slipping by kind of in a fog, while I'm thinking about the past and worrying about the future, and the small self is always planning. The problem is, the Buddha saw clearly, is the fundamental issue is that this self, this idea I have of me, is I've made it up. It's a made-up concept. it doesn't really have any substantiality. It's always looking for something, and it's always disappointed. It thinks, at the time, it thinks that Zazen is the way to liberation. And if liberation doesn't come about, it's probably because we're doing Zazen wrong, or we're not doing enough. So we need to do more, or we need to go on more Sesshin, or we need to find a different teacher. We need to, we're not attaining something, then we have to intensify our practice and intensify. We want this enlightenment. We want to feel this. We want to feel safe. And then we think, if we're enlightened, we'll be safe. But the problem is, it involves me, my small self, is involving itself in its own dissolution. And and so again, it's something that I can grasp. I can grasp at the idea of my own dissolution. And what I realised is that ultimately I didn't really want to desert or let go of my own drama, my own psychological drama. Don't know whether that resonates. So this, what we think of as ourselves, is in a state of tension a lot of the time. We're afraid of enlightenment or of dissolution, and we're afraid of not being enlightened. We're afraid there may be a heaven, and we're afraid there may be a hell. We're afraid there may be a heaven because we won't go there, and we're afraid there might be a hell because we may go there. So the whole thing becomes an interesting paradox again. How Genpo Roshi was great in a way, because what he did in Big Mind was to bring the small self on board and give it permission to be part of the process. And that was great. I really thought that was and he pardon?
Everybody's small self turns on a different knot. Somebody's small self might be fear, someone else's might be self-hatred. It's not all the same. No,
it isn't. We've all got our own cross to bear. And what's interesting is each of us, my experience, and I'm not separate from this, each of us all think that our own particular drama is special and unique, and probably more painful than the next person's. And yet for each of us, maybe it is, but it is our own drama, and each of us has one. And it's out of that concept that, in fact, that we're trapped, that there's something that we need to strive for. The whole business of practice arises. Because the idea of freedom, or enlightenment if you like, arises out of the idea that we're trapped in the first place. And the same thing applies exactly to our sense of being limited. We imagine we're limited, then we are limited. And then that brings us to what I've written down here as the paradox of the Buddha's teaching, because he came from the perspective of basic suffering, and yet it ends, the teaching ends with the reality that we are already there. We already have a limitless potential. And within that limitless potential, there are also limits. That's another paradox. We have to voluntarily choose limits, or voluntarily restrict ourselves in order to function. And I think there's even a book written about that called, there's a chap that lives down in Devon, he's written a book, I think it's called The Perfection of Imperfection. Is that what it's called?
Stephen Batchelor?
No, he was Tibetan teacher. Great book called The Perfection of Imperfection, which is which is nice, that we can be perfect in our imperfection. Because through our, real perception or real freedom releases us from all perspectives. And, we're not fixed. And in physics, I don't want to talk about it again, but, in physics you can be a wave or a particle. You don't have to be either, you can be both at the same time. And when we receive the precepts, and we talk about the Eightfold Path, our inclination is to see those as things we have to stick by rules, and to some degree that we do. But the precepts that we take were never meant to fix us in a locked place. They were never meant to say, this is the final way that you should be. And that's difficult. That raises a lot of questions for folk, about integrity, or not about integrity, about morality, about how to behave in the world, what's right, what's wrong, what's appropriate. And this tradition is relatively unique in finally saying that it's your responsibility. Nobody's going to tell you how you should or shouldn't be. The faith and the confidence arises from the fact that we believe that through being in touch with our own inner wisdom, that we will act appropriately without some external body imposing a fixed set of rules on us. So we do hope and aspire to acting in a way that's spacious and generous, like the lady who finally ended up with the child but offered to give it away. So finally we don't. This practice is not about seeking refuge from your life. It's definitely not about seeking refuge from your life. The Sangha offers refuge. The Sangha is, my favourite part of the three treasures. It offers refuge, but we use life how can I say it? We don't try and transcend life. Our job, if you like, if we don't have a job, is to create life, and create freedom and create creativity, a double. Finally, our life is freedom, and this practice is in a way which is echoed in the Buddhist teaching, and is a move away from feeling limited, from feeling that there's a gap in our lives, to feeling there's a lack, to allowing ourselves to express ourselves naturally and freely, and finally, hopefully, bring a sense of the wonder of being alive. Which again brings me back to my ambivalence. How do we manifest and express our wonder of being alive within the constraints that we need to bring in order to elicit that feeling in us? So as if there's I guess it's a bit like in order to be an abstract painter or a fantastic free-form jazz player, we have to have really good technique.
Exactly.
So we have to really kind of knuckle down in order to have, we have to voluntarily choose to knuckle down in order to have the freedom that comes out of that. Okay. Does anybody have anything to? Oh no, we're going to use the mic for questions. Okay, let's do questions a little later because we've got mic. Oh no, let's be free. Have you got any? Anybody got anything to say on that one? On what I've just spoken about?
I just think it's picking up on what you said, Sensei. For me, what
Sorry,
I've learned,
just start again, Keith.
Sorry.
Just pretend we're in the TV studio. Go on.
Just picking up on what you said, for me personally, what this does, and it was a battle with me to actually, I kept coming and going because, is it for me and what have you. And it's only by doing it and over the years I've realised actually imposing these restrictions on myself gives me the space and clarity to see whether an action is the right action or the wrong action.
Yeah.
Some people don't need that, and I think some people need some sort of spiritual practice, and I'm just one of those people. And you're right, by doing that, by sitting every day and being involved in the Sangha, it helps me to just say, well, right, now I can, or if one day I'm feeling lonely, I say, well, I'll sit with the loneliness as I was getting upset about it, just experience it, and then you see it pass and go, and then something else comes along. So
Keith, that's good. And let me stop you there because you've very neatly, like a disc jockey, segged me into the next bit of the story. Well, it looks like Ishin's going to have. Oh, are you just switching it off, Ish?
No, she's going to hang it.
Oh, are you passing it on? Are you going to switch it off?
No. You want it switched off?
I don't know what she's doing.
No, she was going to hand it round.
You're going to speak, is she?
Well, I don't know what to do. I have to have
Give it to somebody who does. Just
no,
pass
it's okay.
it on.
It's all right.
But
Just
I have
pass
to
it
have
to
instructions.
whoever's speaking.
Okay, you
Yeah.
stop now.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just thank you. So sorry, Ish. I just want to carry on because Keith kicked me into the next bit of the talk, which is, why do we start practice? What do we do? So my experience for myself and what I hear from other folk is that, we experience sometimes in our lives that life's really uncomfortable, it's difficult, it's painful, and we get into the practice in the hope that we're going to be able to escape all that, But in fact, the practice, and particularly Zazen, is about facing our life, living with our life. I know I'm sounding like an old sorry, I keep saying the same thing, and apologies to the folk from Liverpool who must get bored with me saying this, but practice in Zazen is usually the opposite of what we hope for, unconsciously maybe. It's not about escaping those things. It is, on the positive side, definitely about discovering how to appreciate your life. And as Mizumi Roshi titled this book, Appreciating Your Life, what better thing is there to do than, what else is there to do really than that, than to find a way to appreciate your life. I'm on the agnostic to not believing side of personal reincarnation, so maybe this is your one chance of appreciating your life, and maybe you're not going to get another one. So from that perspective, we could see, we'd see our lives as a gift. But it's not an easy thing to master it and to start to appreciate it, and the Buddha himself said that it requires, and I think you recognise these things, it requires openness, it requires endurance, it requires courage, it requires trust, it requires awareness. And on top of all that, just to fool us and fox us, the truth is, we're already there. So I think the bottom line, once you experience this path, and your life and my life, and vice versa, are the same thing, then there's a great incentive to become the master or mistress of your life. Because as far as I can see, each of us is 100% responsible for our own life. Which may sound sensible, straightforward thing to say, but a lot of us spend a lot of time evading that truth. We don't really want to own up to it, that I am 100% responsible for my life. It would be very nice if somebody else could pick up the tab. So, it's okay understanding that, it's okay conceptually taking that on board, but how do you experientially put that into practice? How do you manage yourself, if you like? How do you become the mistress and master of your life? So that you can live a satisfying life and appreciate it, and one in which you don't feel that you're kind of either a victim or a passive observer, and that you don't have any control over it, and it's just kind of passing in a fog. Genpo Roshi says it very clearly. I've written it down here. He says, from an absolute big mind perspective, your life just as it is whole and complete. Your true nature is whole, complete and perfect. So, what is the problem? And the problem is, we don't realise it. And this lack of realisation, the Buddha called ignorance. And this practice is bottom line, I guess, about removing or coming or recognising and dealing with this ignorance. And what that requires of you, which is a 24/7 job, is living your life consciously. And if you live your life consciously, my understanding is that's what's meant by delusion is enlightenment. You're consciously aware that you are deluded, and at the same time you're consciously aware that you are, from day one, absolutely fine. And how do you live with that kind of knife edge paradox? Part of you is timeless, unborn, undying. And part of us is a constantly changing senses, impressions, ideas, views, perspectives. And if I'm sure all of you who sat this week in meditation will recognise that that's a function of our normal way of thinking. Even within an hour we can have a whole different worldview. We start the meditation pissed off and we end up feeling really fine. Or vice versa, or we come along to Sesshin really looking forward to it and find it's a load of crap, we don't really like it. Or we don't want to come along and we force ourselves to get here and we think it's great. So, to summarise it, our job, if you like, as practitioners, is to know that we're in a changing world, but we don't get lost in it. We don't get identified with it. We try and relieve ourselves or release ourselves from all the entanglements and live in the reality of the present. Sounds easy, doesn't it? most of us are lay practitioners, so my sense is that the spiritual key, if you like, is in your work, is in your family, is on the meditation cushion, is in home. And to keep an open mind about the whole thing. I know certainly in the past I had really awful projections about what meditation centres should be, Sangha should be, Sesshin should be, particularly what teachers should be, because most of us, it's more comfortable to have absolutes. It's more comfortable to have that this is the way it is and the way it should be. But our job isn't our job. Our job is to keep returning to our own life and the truth of our own being. So, the Buddha's realization of nirvana, was actually a discovery of that which had been present all the time. So it's nothing changed really, and nothing changes for us. It's like the lady in the beginning of the story, the two mothers. It's a change of perspective. So I just wanted to finish one. I don't feel very fluent today. I'm struggling, so forgive me. So I think it's said in a Mahayana Sutra: if we are not hampered by our confused subjectivity, this our worldly life is an activity of nirvana itself. So if we're not confused by our own subjectivity.
Can you say that again?
If we are not confused by our own subjectivity, this our worldly life is an activity of nirvana itself. And my sense of our concerned subjectivity is the attachment of me, mine, and what I want and don't want. Yeah. Sorry.
I was just going to say that in that story, the one who was the mother, something was more important to her than her self-view.
And her needs,
And so that jumped her out of whatever that was. And it seems to me that part of the practice is that something's more important than our own self-absorbed view.
Yeah.
And that is very apparent in the Sangha, but it's apparent in the teachings as well.
Yeah, thank you.
My understanding.
Sorry, do you want to pass the mic?
What I understood by that story was one woman was lying and the other one actually was the mother.
Ah.
That's where my O-level RE came in.
Okay.
And therefore, the mother would forego her thing at the moment for the life of her, so that her child would live.
Okay. I thought that they both sincerely and genuinely thought that the child was theirs.
No,
do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay. Different.
I'm not sure what this says about Zen, but I think that is the RE version of it.
Yes.
But I'm not.
Hey, you've switched yourself off, I think. You got a red light? Yeah, go. Did it speak? Go, say it again.
I'm not convinced that mothers would necessarily always choose the life of the child versus somebody else doing that. So I think it's not quite as straightforward as the Bible says.
No. Okay.
That's profound.
Okay. So, can I? Does anybody else want the mic? Any other takers on? Oh. Okay. So, another paradox. I've called it dealing with our sense of separation. And the dilemma comes in later. So, I'll speak about me, but maybe it's true for you as well. If I have a problem, and I make a drama of it, what happens is the assumption I have about me and mine get more strong. I get more attached to it, and when I feel justified and right, if I act on that, then I immediately reinforce my sense of self and my sense of separation, and when I try and get over that, usually what I have done in the past is to bring a kind of active will to bear, and I did develop quite a strong will, and I was a karate teacher for 25 years, and people here who are not, involved in the martial arts will know you have to develop at least a physical will. You have to make a decision, otherwise you'd bail early on, But as soon as I make a willed decision, intrinsically within that is a separation. There's me thinking the part of me needs to be told what to do and how to do it. So then that leaves us with a dilemma. We feel a separation, but if we try and close the gap by a force of will, or by a firm decision that I am not going to go down that path, I'm not going to do that again. In truth, what we do then is amplify the problem. And we also, if we're in this practice, we also have going on at the back of our minds that actually, what's going on here? Because I'm being told that everything's basically okay anyway. So how do we move through that dilemma of coming to terms with our own greed, delusion, ignorance, anger, all those things, without actively choosing to work on them? Any suggestions?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Should I use the mic? Might as well. I don't know.
Okay.
But something you were saying. What's the matter with this? Anyway.
It's working.
I flicked the
Is it?
switch
Okay.
to test.
Something you were saying before about enlightenment and delusion.
Yeah.
A story that you sometimes told of the Zen master who's weeping and wailing because he's heard of the death of his son or daughter.
Yeah, it was a student came in to see him, and the student's son had died, I think. Yeah.
Oh.
And he cried.
Yeah.
The one that you.
Yeah, where the student, or whichever
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
says, I thought you understood impermanence and no self, that you move beyond these delusions.
Yeah.
And he said, but this is one of the greatest and hardest delusions of them all.
Okay.
It's the death of my son.
Yeah.
So actually working with delusion, knowing that it is, but still living it as it is.
Yeah, that's well said, John. Yeah. And he also said, if I don't weep now, when will I weep?
Yes.
Which I think, is good. There's one word really, that strikes fear into the soul of the self about this dilemma, and that's the surrender. Don't kick up so much, don't create so much resistance. You kind of surrender to your life. It's not anymore why me, it's why not me.
So there goes the paradox of 100% responsibility for your own life.
Yeah.
Because, I often think, life is what happens when you're not looking.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, and suddenly it's gone. Sorry, do you want to say that again into the mic? Some soul 1,000 miles away may be listening to this, and they'll want your wise words.
Well, it came to me when you were talking about the mothers and the child, and you said then 100% responsibility for what happens in your life. What about the child? I mean, do they have 100% responsibility? So I'm not sure about that one.
No, I didn't say you're 100% responsible for what happens in your life. I said you're 100% responsible for your life. So it's about your response to what happens. You're not responsible. I mean, if you're in an earthquake, I know some folk would say, well, that's the universe decision that you should be there at that time, and I don't, I'm not with that. But how you respond to that is your responsibility. You're not responsible for the earthquake, or you're not responsible for your cancer or whatever. You could be, or you could not be. I don't know. I really don't know. But I'm saying you're responsible for how you choose to be in that. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Wasn't there,
Yeah,
going back to the crying at the funeral story,
yeah.
My understanding it was slightly different. Maybe it was a parallel story that the onlooker saw the Roshi crying.
Yeah.
And he said, well, how come you're crying? Surely you're above such things. And he said, well, something along the lines of, no, it's just the very fact that I can cry in this way, and it makes me more human. Rather, I can't remember the exact phrase.
Yeah.
Maybe Sumi can remember it. We used to hear this a lot. But it's the very practice that makes me able to cry wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Well, for sure. I mean, if you had the choice of going to train with somebody who was impervious to something really sad, or going to somebody who cried, I think all of us, certainly I would, I'd be going to the person who cried.
Yes, and my Sumi Roshi cried.
Yeah.
I mean, he cried with me one time.
Okay, thank you. Hang on, should we have the... We'll get our runner, we've got a mic runner.
Well, I really sympathise. I was in the back last time and I couldn't hear a thing when most people spoke.
You've been talking a lot about sort of open-mindedness and non-fixed views, and I've kind of been hanging out on the internet, and there you meet people who have the most ridiculously fixed views of what is Buddhism and what is Soto Zen.
Yeah.
And then I realised that I actually seem to have the view that anything that's not open-minded isn't Zen.
Yeah.
And doesn't that just mean I have the same problem?
Yeah,
or
you're
am I right?
Yeah. You're right. I mean, Genpo Roshi used to say, as soon as you imagine you're not stuck, that's where you're stuck. I mean, we're all stuck in some place, and it's an ongoing part of our practice to stay unstuck. But it doesn't mean we're unstuck forever. We'll get stuck in the next hour again. But thank you for pointing that out. It's like moderation. And we talk about moderation, but we also need to be moderate in our moderation. Sometimes we need to get really drunk.
Can I ask something?
Yeah, sure.
It just came to me then that the surrender, which from what you're saying is the key, really. Sometimes, I know this might sound a bit perverse, but sometimes that is an act of will.
Yeah.
In other words,
you have to decide that this is something to surrender to, as opposed to something to deal with or fight or moan about or whatever else. So noticing that you need to surrender is a sort of act of will.
I agree. And equally, as you're saying that, what seems to happen for all of us, but all of us in the response to what I'm saying, is that each of us finds a partiality that's not right. So you've got a partial view, other people haven't. So we're all the time struggling with this partiality. And I agree with you. Sometimes, and I was thinking, the paradox of surrender, which works with what you say, is it's an act of courage. It's the opposite of what the dictionary means by it. Surrender requires a huge amount of trust and courage and willingness to deal with the outcome of what may arise. You're not in advance trying to control it. You don't want to know in advance that, if you're going to jump off the cliff, that the water down below is deep enough. You might hit the rocks. You have to have all these qualities. So I'm really glad you raised the point, because it's a knife edge. It's a knife edge, and yet what none of us really want is a knife edge. We want to feel solid with absolutes, and this is the way it is. And yet we all know that that's a place of death. In a pond where there's no fresh water coming in, you get all that green scum on the top. So we have to, what's that phrase about when you apparently act unselfishly, but in fact it's for your own good? What's that?
Altruistic.
Altruistic? There's another word for it.
Enlightened self-interest.
Enlightened self-interest, there's absolutely nothing wrong with enlightened self-interest if it brings about an improvement in your well-being and somebody else's. That's fine. I don't know, unless you're a kind of totally, as it were, cosmic, fully enlightened being who just acts spontaneously in a way which benefits everyone and doesn't even think about themselves, then enlightened self-interest is at least a starting point to move forward.
But this goes back to the little self and
it always
the
goes
big
back.
self, because sometimes people's little self, or somebody's little self, maybe mine, lets people walk all over them. So that's not self-interest, that's something else.
Well, walk over them, did you say?
Yeah, or walk on them, or, So I once asked Genpo this, because he was very big into, people being freed from their ego at some point, getting rid of the ego. So I said, and I still say this, there are some people who actually first need to get a bit of an ego in order to function.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's nothing more unsatisfactory than somebody coming to practice with a poorly developed ego who wants to drop it.
Yeah.
You get a little loud, wimpy splash on the floor, It's like, I'm not interested in that at all. I want, your first job is to build a solid sense of who you are and feel affirmed in who you are and feel strong in who you are, and only then drop the damn thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's, what's the point? No, I agree. Yeah. I haven't even got to page 4 yet. I had some really interesting things to tell you, but it's 5 to 1. So, I'll just say one thing about why silence is scary. And why stillness that arises out of silence is scary. Because there's nothing of you in there. You've gone. And our whole wish from a small self perspective is to fill the absolute nothingness with me. Isn't that true? Wouldn't we all, don't we want to fill it with me? And yet, it's not a very wise way to go. Yeah. Yeah. So whenever you see yourself, you know, in this discussion and in the way I speak, in the way the questions are being asked, or the things people have said, what is evident in them all is that we all want to stand on one side or the other. Our natural impulse is to stand on one side or the other. And so, you know, the plan is that whatever place you find yourself standing, have a really good look at it. Because there is another side. That doesn't mean you can't stand there and you know, and fight for your corner, but finally we need to sit, when we're on the cushion anyway, let's say when we're on the cushion, when we're doing Zazen, when we're on Sesshin, let's try and be present without judgment. Let's try and be present without judgment, at least for this week. And there's some selfishness in that, because I'd like you to be without judgment to me as well. Okay. So we've got like 2 minutes for any pearls of wisdom or otherwise. Okay, we've got to take a brave taker.
When you just said that was the stillness, or that it's scary, I think it is scary to get, like, to be silent, or that it gets still. But I don't think that we disappear then.
No, we don't.
Because, I mean, we are still there, our bodies are there, and they're also communicating, but we are not really used to communicate in that way, or just be without language, you know, so...
Thanks for saying that, because to everyone else in the Zen, no, you're definitely there.
Yeah.
They can see you, they see the way you move, your whole being is manifested in, you know, in the way you sit, and the way you stand, and the way you hold a mic. So thank you for pointing that out, it's really important. Yeah, oddly enough, Zazen is a very physical bodily practice. Yeah. What do you think? Should we finish? Lunch service? Thank you. Thank you.